Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you for your very stimulating presentation. Now the floor is open for the discussion. Please, James Larry.
Thank you very much. This was quite a lot to take in terms of very disconcerting news, so to speak. I was wondering, how can one fruitfully go ahead trying to address this problem? Because clearly, in European states, there will be quota refugees, just some few thousand for each country. That's the sort of normal policy. Migration is regarded as a problem. And Betts and Collier, in their book Refuge, point to the importance of using development aid in the regions. I am married to a refugee myself, and he always wanted to go home. And I think this is the natural thing. The nation you come from, you want to go home if you can. So it seems to me that the solution lies in the state, somehow building states. And while we can do a lot about, one cannot do a lot about climate change very quickly, but we can do a lot about corruption and violence. So wars do end. Africa is a continent with 5% growth, but marred by corruption and violence in many states. So as an expert on this, how should one address this in the international politics today? Because unless something is done, there will be no solutions forthcoming. It's a big question before lunch, I realize that.
Thank you, please.
Thank you so much for your reflection. To talk about the political class in the 21st century is to enter the reptilian brain, is to enter the part of the brain that we have we thought we had left behind. Clearly, the data show a very, very profound continuity. If you look at approximately about 75 years for which we have good, reliable data, the rate of migration remains very, very stable. 2.5 to 3.2% of the world's population will, at any given moment, be on the move. To create massive migrations, you really need to push people from their environments. It is not easy. It requires a lot of dystopic and brutal work. We must and we can do more to reverse climate change. This will be the most significant driver of the involuntary displacement of human beings moving forward. The data on this are extraordinarily clear. Yes, sustainable development should be one of the instruments deployed to prevent the need for human beings without dignity to be able to offer love and work to their families in their national contexts. What we're witnessing is precisely a drive in the wrong direction. It's like the GPS, you know, when you put the GPS in your car, is sending you backwards. It's not sending you forward. The GPS should send us towards sustainable, charitable, humanitarian growth, so that human beings who migrate do so because they choose to do so, to the betterment of both receiving and sending countries. I have to make a very obvious point. The high-income countries of the world have benefited enormously by migration. The United States is Exhibit A. The net economic impact of migration is a plus, regardless of current concerns over immigration, labor markets, and the competition of immigrants with native-born citizens. The failure is a failure of education. It's a failure of educating, first, of course, the children, to develop the capacity, a fundamental humanitarian capacity to, as Monsignor Sanchez Orondo reminds us in a recent essay, to see oneself as another. It is the humanitarian call to grow in children and in adolescents, a sensibility where the dread of the other is turned into a democratizing desire for friendship, for charity, for acknowledging and addressing our basic humanitarian obligations. For, in the refugee, thereby by the grace of God go I. We all have been refugees. We all have been strangers in the land of Egypt. It is, as I see it, a fundamental failure of the institutions of the state to educate the citizens, to understand and to empathically and compassionately connect with the other, the brother, the sister. For in him, in her, there go I. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Please. Niraya Godfather.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that terrific paper. I was very struck by your opening observation that we are all migrants at some point or other. But of course, all migrants are not refugees. And all refugees are not, to introduce the third category, stateless people. I'm assuming that your figures of migration include the United Nations figure of 15 million stateless people in the world. And I think the condition of stateless people is particularly important and poignant, more perhaps than that of refugees who do have states of origin and states of adoption, perhaps, in that they have no addressee for their claim to human rights. There is no nation, no state, and no nation state that the stateless people can appeal to for even minimal human rights. And I was wondering whether you, as an anthropologist of migration, have some specific insights to offer us on an anthropology, not just of migration in general, but anthropology of statelessness per se. Thank you. That goes back actually to the Hannah Arendt point at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, in fact, Hannah Arendt in chapter 8 of The Origins of Totalitarianism reminds me that the horror of the refugee is the horror of human beings losing the right to have rights. I did refer to the data on the stateless. What I see as a new and extremely unsettling development is the creation of what González Terán, in a previous gathering of the Academy, has called the crisis of confinement. It's the emergence of these zones of confinement between and betwixt states where human beings now linger in limbo for ever greater periods of time, where children continue to be traumatized and re-traumatized, where physical, mental health abuse continue, where rape, where the brutality of the conditions get replicated in the camp, the conditions that characterize the journeys of those seeking refuge. So the matter of the stateless is a matter of grave concern. What I see as a new formation is the formation of these new spaces. We see them in the islands of Australia. We see it increasingly in the United States and Mexico southern border. We see it in Europe, perhaps in the nature of the new arrangements between the Union and the Turkish government, where millions and millions of human beings are waiting in no man's land with very, very little access to the fundamental dignity that flows from our condition as members of the human family. This is what I see as the new dark frontier emerging the world over.
Thank you. Buttiglione, and then our Chancellor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You have anticipated with this last remarks a large part of what I wanted to ask you. Don't you think we should stress more the right not to migrate? I participate in the discussions here in Europe, and there is a lot of talk about migration policies. I am convinced that no migration policies are possible, and you cannot give a true answer to a wrong question. The question on migration policy is a wrong question. For Europe, the real question is neighborhood policies. At the end of the last century, Theo Weigel remembers this, in Barcelona, we made a meeting of the heads of state and government, and we said, we can defend our welfare, not building up walls, but spreading it, creating an area of common welfare in the Mediterranean and in Africa. Then we did not do that. We made some experiments. I did one. I participated in the creation of the agreement between Italy and Albania. It works perfectly. We have 400,000 Albanians in Italy, and they are not a problem. We were all afraid of Albanians, the invasion of Albanian migrants 10, 15 years, no, 20 years ago. Now, no, they are integrated. We have sent back those who had to be sent back, not to die, to starve, but with the policies that created jobs in Albania. And this supported also the Italian economy. So this is the first question. Should we not stress more this? As a matter of European policy, because a large part of the problems in Africa are the result of a lack of European policy, but also at a broader international level. The second point regards the cultural aspects of migrations. I have made this experience. There are some migrants that can more easily be integrated, and some migrants that can, with a much greater difficulty, be integrated. And this is dependent largely on the culture of those who arrive and the families. Migrant communities in which there are families, and families means women, in which the proportion of women is more or less similar to that of men, are much more easily integrated. Communities in which there is a very large percentage of males, well, all communities of males without women are in principle dangerous, with the possible exceptions of monasteries. I don't know. This is also, and the third point is the illegals. To have illegals means to put them in the hands of mafia and organized crime. What can a man do to protect his property and his family if he must consider a police officer as an enemy who could send him back? He must either defend himself with a culture of violence, or to go to the mafia boss of this borough and tell him, well, you protect me and I do whatever you ask me. So should we, this 3 point, not be more strongly stressed in our statements?
Thanks, Rocco. Please.
Thank you so much. Very briefly, starting with numero tres and working backwards. The data, for example, on the largest flows of unauthorized migrants, which is unfolding in the southern border of the United States today, points towards a real malevolent alignment of armaments trafficking, narcotics trafficking, and human trafficking, aligning and all in the hands of the same players. Generally, the armaments flow from north to south. The human trafficking and the narcotics flow from south to north. So it is entirely now in the hands of the mafia, the movements of peoples. On your second point, on the question of assimilation. So I am the child of immigrants from the Basque Country and from Tuscany in Argentina. When the Italians and with the Irish and when the Eastern European Jews arrived in the other great country of immigration in the Americas, the United States, there was a moral panic. The Catholics, the Jews will never adapt to what was seen fundamentally as a Protestant Anglo-Saxon culture. Today, looking backwards, we understand the complete misguidedness of that general approach to immigration. Think of it this way. Until very, very recently, all of the members of the United States Supreme Court, and Professor Garrosa will help me here, all of the members of the United States Supreme Court were either Catholics or Jews. Now, if a dean from the University of California would have 100 years ago said, relax, the Jews, the Catholics are going to do very well in the United States. They're going to enter and reign over the sanctum sanctorum of the American secular religion, which is the law and the system of justice. So the question of culture and assimilation is a very complicated question, and it's one that when the structures of the nation state are well aligned to educate, to ease the transition of new arrivals, we can see enormous gains. On the first point, yes, the right not to migrate. Again, you know, this is self-created. It's a self-created catastrophe. The Galicians that came to the New World, about 40% of all the Galicians that came to the New World went back to Spain. Michael Piori, a very eminent economist at MIT, shows that a third of all the Italians that came to New York and New Jersey and California went back to Italy. So, again, sustainable development, housing, schooling, infrastructure that is aligned with the realities of the 21st century would tremendously disrupt the dystopic impulses of, let's call it, desperation migration. Most human beings, as Professor Matlari mentioned, would rather not move. Most human beings will rather not move. And if they move, the data in Europe, by the way, internal data, the data from the New World show a remarkable pattern of migration, return to your country of origin, and extraordinary development. Today, the remittances that immigrants send to the poor countries in Africa, in Latin America, and in Asia constitute the greatest poverty reduction mechanism the world has ever seen. Billions of dollars are repatriated today by very small numbers of immigrants in the diaspora. For the poorest African countries, up to a third of the GDP is repatriated by immigrants living in the wealthier centers of North America and the United States. This crisis has been created that is a crisis that can most definitely be managed with a sincere heart, with a neocortex, with the better angels of our nature, not with the reptilian brain, not with fear, not with hate.
Thank you. We have the last intervention by our Chancellor.
Sorry, because of the time. Very brief. In what way the religions today, follow the idea of the Pope Francis? In what way have some collaboration to accept the immigration, to recognize the other as ourselves? So, especially in United States, for example, the evangelists or the other forms, all people help in this way or not? So.
Yeah. Thanks.
I think that in the United States, the Catholic Church has and continues to have an extraordinary role in the transition and the adaptation of new immigrants into the country. It is said that the church was built by immigrants, and immigrants built the church in the United States. And today, the immigrants, especially the clandestini, the unauthorized, the people without papers, they will turn to the church first and foremost for shelter, for guidance in the context of the new crisis that has been created. So the Holy Father and the church are at the forefront of a humanitarian response to immigration in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a proper moment to end. So we have ended up with this first session of our workshop, and now we are invited to lunch downstairs in this same building. And we will convene again at 2 o'clock, okay? We have to respect here the timetable. Thank you very much to everybody.